October 18, 2026, 8:42 p.m. The lights inside the sold-out Madison Square Garden in New York City pulsed with electric energy as more than 20,000 fans screamed Bruno Mars' name. But just 90 seconds before he was supposed to walk on stage, a tiny knock echoed through his dressing room door, soft enough to be ignored yet strangely impossible to forget, and when his security guard slowly opened it, nobody was standing there except a little girl wearing a faded yellow hoodie and holding a white envelope almost as big as her hands before quietly placing it on the floor and disappearing into the crowded backstage hallway without saying a single word, leaving everyone frozen as Bruno looked toward the empty corridor wondering who she was, how she had somehow made it through multiple security checkpoints, and why she had vanished before anyone could stop her, while the arena outside continued shaking with chants that had no idea something unexpected had already changed the entire night. And as Bruno bent down to pick up the envelope, his fingers hesitated because only 3 words were written across the front in careful childish handwriting. "Please kneel first," making his heartbeat stumble for reasons he couldn't explain, while his manager laughed nervously and suggested it was probably another fan letter. Yet Bruno couldn't shake the strange feeling crawling through his chest, so he slowly opened it and unfolded a single sheet of notebook paper that carried only one sentence beneath the drawing of a tiny smiling sun. "Before you sing your first song, please kneel beside me because I don't have much time left." And for a long silent moment nobody in the room spoke as Bruno stared at the words, searching for a clue that wasn't there, wondering who had written them, why they knew exactly where he would be, and what they meant by not having much time left, before the production manager burst through the doorway announcing they were already 30 seconds behind schedule, snapping everyone back to reality as stagehands rushed past carrying guitars, cables, and camera equipment while the roar of the audience grew even louder. But Bruno slipped the letter into his jacket pocket instead of throwing it away, unable to explain why he suddenly felt responsible for finding the little girl, and as he walked through the narrow backstage tunnel toward the stage entrance, he kept scanning every face around him. Every child, every family, every security officer, hoping to recognize the yellow hoodie, yet she was nowhere to be seen, almost as if she had disappeared into thin air, until one elderly janitor quietly touched Bruno's arm and whispered, "If you're looking for the little girl, she asked me to tell you she's waiting where people stop believing miracles can happen." Then the old man simply smiled and walked away before Bruno could ask another question, leaving him even more confused as the countdown reached 5 seconds and the giant LED screens exploded with flashing lights, fireworks erupted above the stage, and the announcer's voice echoed across the arena introducing one of the biggest performers in the world. But instead of feeling excitement, Bruno carried only questions as he stepped into the blinding spotlight with thousands of glowing phone lights stretching across the arena like a sky filled with stars, smiling for the audience while secretly wondering whether somewhere inside that sea of faces a frightened little girl was waiting for him to keep a promise he had never agreed to make. The opening notes of 24K Magic exploded through the arena, and within seconds every mystery inside Bruno's mind was forced into the background as 20,000 voices sang every lyric with him. But no matter how brightly he smiled, his eyes kept drifting across the front rows, searching for the faded yellow hoodie that seemed to have vanished completely. Between songs he walked from one side of the stage to the other, waving at children sitting on their parents' shoulders, pointing microphones toward fans who knew every word, and thanking everyone for coming. Yet the letter inside his jacket felt heavier with every passing minute. During a brief instrumental break, he leaned toward his longtime guitarist and quietly asked, "Did anyone find that little girl?" The guitarist simply shook his head without missing a chord. "Security checked every entrance. Nobody knows who you're talking about." Bruno nodded, pretending everything was fine, but his chest tightened. Whoever she was, she had somehow reached him when nobody else could. As the concert continued, giant screens captured smiling faces throughout the crowd until the camera suddenly landed on a little girl sitting in a wheelchair several rows from the stage. Bruno instinctively looked toward her, expecting to see the same yellow hoodie, but instead she wore a bright pink jacket and waved excitedly. He smiled warmly and tossed her a guitar pick before moving on, though disappointment lingered behind his eyes. Several songs later, just as the audience settled into the emotional atmosphere of a slower ballad, Bruno noticed movement near the security barrier. An elderly janitor, the same man from backstage, stood silently among the event staff. Their eyes met for only a second before the old man slowly pointed toward the far left side of the arena near a dimly lit aisle rarely shown on camera. Bruno followed the direction without interrupting the song. There, almost hidden in the shadows, stood the little girl in the faded yellow hoodie. She wasn't waving. She wasn't calling his name. She simply watched him with calm eyes while holding a tiny stuffed rabbit against her chest. For a heartbeat, the noise of the arena seemed to disappear. Bruno almost forgot the lyrics as she gently lifted one finger and pointed toward the floor in front of her, repeating the silent request from the letter, "Kneel." Before anyone around him realized what he was doing, Bruno slowly walked across the stage, leaving his band exchanging confused glances behind him. The audience cheered, assuming it was part of the performance, while cameras followed his every step. Reaching the edge of the stage closest to the girl, he looked directly into her eyes. They were filled with fear, hope, and a strange kind of peace that no child should ever have. He lowered the microphone and, without saying a word, slowly dropped to one knee. Instantly, the arena fell unusually quiet. Thousands of phones remained raised, but almost nobody screamed anymore. The little girl smiled for the very first time, stepped closer with the help of a nurse standing beside her, and whispered something so softly that only Bruno could hear. "Thank you. Now my mommy will believe heroes are real." Bruno's smile faded into confusion. "Where's your mom?" he whispered back. The little girl slowly turned her head toward a woman standing several feet behind her. The woman wasn't filming like everyone else. She was crying so hard she could barely remain standing. Bruno noticed she was clutching a hospital bracelet in one hand. Before he could ask another question, the little girl carefully reached into the pocket of her yellow hoodie and handed him a second envelope, even smaller than the first. "Please don't open it until after the concert," she whispered. "Promise me." Bruno gently took the envelope, his voice barely audible as he replied, "I promise." She nodded with quiet satisfaction, hugged her stuffed rabbit tightly, and stepped back toward her mother while the crowd erupted into thunderous applause, believing they had just witnessed a touching fan interaction. Only Bruno knew that somehow, without understanding why, the mystery had just become even deeper. Bruno slipped the second envelope into the inside pocket of his jacket and forced himself to keep his promise, even though every instinct urged him to open it immediately, because something about the little girl's steady voice made him believe that breaking his word would somehow break something much bigger than a simple promise. The band transitioned into the next song, and the audience instantly jumped back into celebration, but Bruno's performance carried a different kind of emotion now. Every lyric seemed more personal. Every smile was softer. He caught himself looking toward the little girl between verses, and each time he found her watching with that same peaceful expression, gently hugging the worn stuffed rabbit as if nothing else in the world mattered. Her mother stood beside her with tears drying on her cheeks, occasionally whispering something into her daughter's ear that made the child's smile even wider. As the concert reached its halfway point, Bruno invited everyone to turn on the lights from their phones. Within seconds, the arena transformed into a glowing sea of tiny stars stretching in every direction. The sight was breathtaking, and for a moment even Bruno forgot the mystery surrounding the girl. Then, as the applause faded, he spoke quietly into the microphone. "You know, we all come here tonight carrying something nobody else can see. Sometimes it's happiness. Sometimes it's fear. Sometimes it's hope. Whatever you're carrying, I hope you don't carry it alone." The crowd answered with warm applause, unaware that Bruno was speaking as much to himself as to anyone else. Backstage, several crew members exchanged puzzled looks. They had performed hundreds of concerts with him, yet tonight felt different. There was an unusual calm in his voice, as though something invisible had shifted inside him. During another short instrumental break, his manager hurried to the side of the stage and whispered, "Bruno, we've been checking the guest list. Nobody knows that little girl. There are no VIP passes under her family's name, no backstage credentials, nothing. It's like they appeared out of nowhere." Bruno frowned. "Did anyone talk to her mother?" Security tried. She only smiled and said, "Everything will make sense after the last song." Before Bruno could respond, the music cue signaled him back to center stage. He nodded and walked forward, but the words echoed in his mind. After the last song. Why was everyone connected to this little girl speaking in riddles? As the concert moved into its emotional finale, the atmosphere became almost sacred. Fans wrapped their arms around each other. Couples swayed together. Parents lifted their children onto their shoulders. Bruno looked toward the yellow hoodie once more, only to discover the little girl was no longer standing near the aisle. His heart skipped. He scanned the entire front section. She was gone. Her mother was gone too. Even the nurse had disappeared. Panic briefly crossed his face, though he quickly hid it behind another smile. Between lyrics, he quietly asked a nearby security guard, "Did you see where they went?" The guard looked confused. "Who?" Bruno pointed toward the empty space. "The little girl." The guard stared for several seconds before shaking his head. "There hasn't been a child standing there for the last 10 minutes. Bruno's pulse quickened. He knew what he had seen. Thousands of people had watched him kneel. Cameras had followed the moment. Yet somehow the family had vanished without anyone noticing. He finished the final chorus almost automatically, his mind racing far from the music. Confetti cannons exploded overhead as golden paper filled the arena like shimmering snow. The audience roared with deafening applause while Bruno bowed deeply with his band. But instead of celebrating, he hurried off stage the instant the lights dimmed. Ignoring congratulations from crew members and waiting friends, he rushed into his dressing room, closed the door behind him, and carefully removed the second envelope from his jacket. His hands trembled slightly as he broke the seal. Inside was another handwritten note and an old, slightly faded photograph. The picture showed a much younger Bruno at a small community music event years before he became famous. Kneeling beside him was a little girl wearing the very same yellow hoodie and holding the very same stuffed rabbit, both of them smiling at the camera. Bruno's breathing stopped. He stared at the photograph in disbelief. He had absolutely no memory of that day. Yet there he was, unmistakably smiling beside the child who had somehow found him again years later. Slowly, with his heart pounding louder than the cheers still echoing outside the arena, he unfolded the note and read the first line. "You kept your promise once before, even though you don't remember." Bruno lowered himself into the chair in front of the dressing room mirror, the noise of thousands of fans still celebrating outside fading into a distant hum as he stared at the old photograph. He traced the edge of it with his thumb, searching his memory for even the smallest fragment of recognition. But the day captured in the picture remained completely blank. His reflection in the mirror looked pale beneath the backstage lights. Taking a slow breath, he unfolded the rest of the letter. 10 years ago, it read, "My mom brought me to a free neighborhood music festival after my first round of chemotherapy. I was scared because I thought losing my hair meant everyone would laugh at me. Before you walked on stage, you noticed me hiding behind a folding chair. You knelt beside me, handed me your lucky guitar pick, and told me that courage isn't something people see. It's something they feel. You promised that if we ever met again, you would kneel first so I'd never have to look up to find hope." Bruno closed his eyes as a faint image finally surfaced. Not a complete memory, just flashes. A hot summer afternoon, folding chairs, children laughing, a shy little girl holding a stuffed rabbit, himself kneeling to make her smile. It had been one of hundreds of small moments during his early career, forgotten as years of tours, interviews, and sold-out arenas rushed by. But for that little girl, it had become the most important memory of her life. His throat tightened as he continued reading. "You probably forgot. That's okay. I never did." A knock interrupted the silence. His manager stepped into the room carrying a tablet. "Bruno, you need to see this." On the screen was a replay from the concert. Millions of people were already sharing the clip online. The video showed Bruno walking across the stage, kneeling before the little girl, smiling gently as she whispered into his ear. Comments poured in every second. Some called it the most touching concert moment they had ever seen. Others wondered who the child was. But one comment, posted only moments earlier, caught Bruno's attention. It was from the girl's mother. "Thank you for keeping a promise you made when nobody was watching." Bruno looked up immediately. "Can you find her?" His manager nodded. "We already did. They're at St. Mary's Children's Hospital. They left right after the concert." Without changing out of his stage clothes, Bruno grabbed his jacket and hurried toward the waiting SUV. The streets of Manhattan shimmered with rain that had begun falling during the encore, neon lights reflecting across the wet pavement as traffic slowly parted. No one spoke during the drive. Bruno kept the photograph in one hand and the letter in the other, reading every word again and again. When the car finally stopped outside the hospital just after 11:30 p.m., the building stood quiet beneath the soft glow of its entrance lights. Inside, the smell of antiseptic mixed with the distant beeping of medical monitors. A nurse recognized Bruno instantly but simply smiled and whispered, "She's been waiting for you." He followed her through a silent hallway decorated with children's drawings taped to the walls. Outside room 214, the little girl's mother stood alone. Her eyes were red from crying, but when she saw Bruno, she smiled with genuine warmth. "You came," she whispered. Bruno nodded. "I had to." She gently reached for his hand. "She believed you would." Bruno glanced toward the partially open door. "Can I see her?" The woman hesitated for only a moment before quietly answering, "Yes. But there's something you should know first." Her voice trembled as tears filled her eyes once more. "She didn't ask you to kneel tonight because she wanted everyone to see her." She paused, struggling to continue. "She asked because she wanted one last chance to look her hero in the eyes." Bruno's breathing caught in his chest as he slowly turned toward the doorway, suddenly understanding that everything that had happened since the mysterious envelope appeared backstage had been leading to this single moment. Bruno slowly pushed open the hospital room door, his footsteps almost silent against the polished floor as the soft glow of a bedside lamp revealed the little girl resting beneath a warm blanket, still wearing the same faded yellow hoodie draped over the end of her bed and clutching the worn stuffed rabbit against her chest. When she heard the door, she turned her head and smiled with the same peaceful expression she had worn during the concert. "I knew you'd come," she whispered. Bruno couldn't answer immediately. His throat tightened as he walked to her bedside and, without thinking, lowered himself onto one knee again so they were eye to eye. She giggled softly. "You remembered." A tear rolled down Bruno's cheek before he even realized he was crying. "I'm sorry," he said quietly. "I forgot that day. But I never meant to forget you." The little girl gently reached out and placed her tiny hand over his. "It's okay. You remembered when it mattered." Her mother stood quietly in the corner of the room, covering her mouth as tears streamed down her face. Even the nurse watching from the hallway wiped away her own tears. For several minutes, nobody rushed the silence. Bruno asked about her stuffed rabbit, and she explained that its name was Sunny because she wanted something to hug whenever the days felt dark. She showed him drawings she had made during long hospital stays, including one of the two of them on stage together under thousands of stars. One picture caught Bruno's attention more than the others. It showed him kneeling before her exactly as he had done that evening, except above them she had written in colorful crayon, "Heroes always kneel so nobody feels small." Bruno smiled through his tears. "That's better than any song I've ever written." The little girl laughed quietly before looking toward the window where rain continued tapping gently against the glass. "Can I ask you something?" she said. "Anything," Bruno replied. "When you have concerts after tonight, will you keep looking for kids who feel invisible?" Bruno looked into her eyes and nodded without hesitation. "I promise." "Even if nobody's filming?" she asked. "Especially if nobody's filming," he answered. She smiled, completely satisfied with his answer, then slowly reached beneath her pillow and pulled out the guitar pick he had given her years before. Though worn and scratched with time, it had been carefully protected inside a small clear case. "I've kept it with me every day," she whispered. "But I think it's yours again." Bruno gently closed her fingers around it instead of taking it. "No," he said softly. "It belongs to the bravest person in this room." Tears filled her eyes as she leaned forward and wrapped her arms around him. Bruno hugged her carefully, resting his forehead against hers while the room remained completely silent except for the gentle beeping of the heart monitor and the quiet sound of rain outside. After a long moment, he stood and embraced her mother, who whispered through her tears, "You gave her something medicine never could." "Hope." Bruno shook his head gently. "She gave that to me tonight." Before leaving, he turned one last time. The little girl raised her hand and smiled. "Good night, Bruno." He smiled back. "Good night, sweetheart." As he stepped into the hallway, he paused, looked at the children's drawings covering the walls, and made a quiet decision that would change his life. Over the following months, in this fictional story, Bruno anonymously funded music rooms in children's hospitals across the country, visited young patients without cameras or headlines, and made it a personal tradition before every concert to spend time with children facing difficult battles, never announcing those visits publicly because he had finally understood that the most meaningful performances often happened long before the stage lights came on. At every show, just before the first song, he would pause for a brief moment, place one hand over the inside pocket of his jacket where he now carried a copy of the little girl's drawing, and remember the promise that had found its way back to him after so many years. And though the crowd never knew the reason behind that quiet ritual, Bruno always did. Because one unforgettable night in New York, a little girl in a faded yellow hoodie reminded him that fame may inspire people for a moment, but kindness remembered for years can change a life forever. And in the end, it was not the sold-out arena, the applause, or the music that left the deepest mark on his heart, but the simple act of kneeling so that one brave little girl would never have to feel small again.